there you go. There's the beautiful brother.
Whereas, morning.
So as we mentioned earlier, we are talking Khoisan tonight, and it's Khoi and San. It's not the two together, okay? And who better to discuss this subject with us than our brother from Gauteng, who seems to be well-oiled to join this show. Yes. So, Joe, what will you be speaking to?
So Dale's in charge of the
Yeah, so Khoisan Protestors to grow greenhouse Dagga on the lawns of the union buildings. Khoisan Protestors have been squatting on the lawns for just over 2 years, actually.
Nearly 3 now.
There are a small group of people who occupy the lawns, and as of recently, in April 21, erected their first greenhouse, which has been spotted growing a few Dagga plants. Now, as you can see in the images, the one problem that authorities, or mainly the DA, have a problem with is that Mr. What does he call himself? King. Yes, Mr. King Khoisan SA. He likes to walk around naked, so that offends a couple of people.
Especially in Pretoria, you know, it's still quite conservative.
Yeah. No, I think this story is important to bring up culturally. You can tell, like many of us who have cannabis as part of our living culture, it's important for their culture as well. And as part of their demands in recognizing their culture in our government, their language, and their people, also the acceptance of them growing their plants that they use for medicine.
I just find it fascinating. I would just curious to find out if the cops are going to come in and bash down their cannabis. Growing weed on the garden, on the lawns of the union building. That's just...
Maybe they've made it
legendary.
space.
So classic.
It is legendary.
It's legendary.
It's absolutely legendary.
We
yes.
stand by these guys.
It's the best civil disobedience that's going on under our noses.
It's liberating,
In the garden of the parliament.
Yeah.
So Warren, what you got to say, brother?
Yes, no. Good evening, good people. I vibes to you. Hope you're lekker warm there.
Yeah.
It's very cold down here in the Eastern Cape on the coast, but we're keeping warm and dank. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic you guys are talking about tonight, you know, about the biopiracy as well as Khoisan indigenous people. And the two talk to each other because, you know, if you look at indigenous cannabis, indigenous strains, genetics, and how important it is to protect these land races, many companies, without mentioning them, have come here, have claimed these genetics, and you'll find South African and African genetics all over the world. And it's a bit of a pity and a shame that our people down on the ground that have preserved these genetics through prohibition, through prejudice, through police harassment, they have still maintained and preserved these genetics. So when you talk about biopiracy, it really strikes a chord with me as I would say an indigenous people's activist that looks at the effect of the modernization, of the globalization on indigenous growers and indigenous people, because the techniques in which we grow cannabis and how we look at not only the genetics of cannabis, but what we call the epigenetics of cannabis, the environmental factors that affect the development of these genetics. And I talk from a point of science, not just from a point of opinion. I had a very good chat with a professor yesterday, and he explained a lot of things to me about how when so-called geneticists breed lower THC cannabis or lower CBD cannabis, you're actually diluting the gene pool.
Yes.
And you're actually creating an inferior product, which has an effect on the greater development and gene dynamics. So that the biopiracy is something that we really need to be aware of and take note of what's going on in our cannabis community and industry. And I wish that government would take it more seriously, because you know, like you say, Durban Poison, Transkei, you know, those names are so renowned. Rooibos, they are so renowned with our indigenous genetics, our indigenous, I would say, identity. So that also talks to what is happening at the union buildings with the Khoisan brothers and the Khoisan community, and the stance that they are making. It talks volumes about this land belongs to the indigenous people, and a group of that is the Khoi and the San. So, and we as Khoi and San, because I have heritage in that, we believe in the indigenous use of cannabis, and that it should be part of your herb garden. So the fact that they are going to the union buildings and kind of claiming land on that building from those that claim land from them and growing cannabis is a sign of liberation. It's a sign of fire. It's. I think Jules would be smiling now to see that,
Yes.
you know. So I really commend my brothers down there at the Pretoria Union buildings. Fire, more fire, yeah.
Hey, by the office.
We come to, yeah, man, you know.
Don't walk past it.
And I'm glad that they're growing, and it's open. And the great thing is that the police seems that they're gonna have to tolerate this, because it's we have a right to protest. So this is kind of like an indigenous people's protest. So it's actually it's a developing story. Yeah.
We might have to take a bit of a field trip one day, hey?
I think so. I think we're going to send. I think we're going to send some people out to just go and meet the people sometime soon and set something up, and then we'll do a little outside broadcast from the union buildings. I mean, wouldn't that be great? But you know, I think when it comes to both the biopiracy and the protection of our land races and the protection of our First Nations people, I think that we also need to be quite positive, apart from the fact that there's lots of very, very clever people out there working on the cannabis plant. You know, more research needs to be done. We have got a heritage in since we've had democracy in South Africa of big court cases that have been won. Look what happened with Scaletium. If anybody knows what happened with Scaletium, is that the people of the Northern Cape won their case, and Scaletium can't be used without those communities getting some sort of a royalty. And we've seen it with rooibos tea and with buchu. So I think with the cannabis plant, the fact that this conversation, it's not only starting now. This conversation has been going on for as long as I've been an activist, you know?
Exactly. And the structure exists. If they're doing it for other communities with other plants, they can't say, oh, but now we've got to figure out how. The structure exists. Thanks. Just
and
apply it.
We've got amazing, also our fellow non-profits in South Africa. I'm just thinking of the African Centre for Biodiversity in Stellenbosch. And Julian and I went and visited them a few years ago, and it was a very, very interesting meeting, and the people are doing great work. And also now at the United Nations, now that we have had the cannabis rescheduling is over, at least for the moment, and we're moving more into this traditional use, particularly traditional medicine, because that's the way that they work at the UN, through the medicine. I think that this stuff is going to come more and more to the fore. And I think that South Africa can lead the way when it comes to it, because we already have a few of our local government people that are not too well known, who are working at this level with all sorts of plants and all sorts of cultural heritage, down to things like Indabeli painting. You know, suddenly some designer in New York has got an outfit walking on the catwalk with Indabeli printing on it, and no, you know, if you're not acknowledging where that print comes from, that is cultural appropriation. Isn't it?
No, it's biting off their culture.
I don't know. Don't you think it's cultural appropriation, Russ?
Yes. Yeah, you know, to a certain extent, you know, cannabis is appropriated by so many, so we would understand that people would love South African and African cannabis, and
good answer.
I just feel that, you know, that like the broader community, the international community, owes it to our terpenes, owes it to our genetics, you know. And I think to a certain extent there's a social responsibility on these so-called companies that have benefited from this appropriation of our genetics, you know, that are core to the development of of the broader strains in genetics. So for me, I feel that we are starting the right conversation. We're not where we're supposed to be. Prohibition, especially in South Africa, has caused us not to allow us to develop our land races fully. I speak to a lot of indigenous growers that travel through these networks, and they say prohibition has caused them to harvest early. Seed production hasn't been, they haven't been the ability to pick the best plant, the best pheno. So the consciousness and the science of breeding hasn't been applied because prohibition has restricted that. So if the cops and government can just back off and allow, and like Jules said, can just unleash this plant and allow it to develop,
Yes.
I think it will be a great thing for African genetics in general. So yeah, continue the work, keep the fire burning.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to have to be moving on. It's great to see you. And tomorrow, in 2 weeks, we're going to be heading down to the coast for the Canna Cup, and then I'm going to be traveling back up via East London and Kids Beach and PE, and I'm going to be visiting some of our cannabis family along the way, and Brother Warren and his 420 cannabis socials in East London. So really looking forward to that, really looking forward to the Garden Route Canna Cup. We've booked our accommodation, everything's rocking and rolling on that side, and we're going to be doing a live Hotbox transmission from down in Plettenberg Bay that first weekend of August. So that's going to be great fun. And